Yeah, you were like in suspended animation.
I could smell it in the air. I can feel it in my bones. But we do have a nice competitive slate of games this week, and I'm calling Ohio State, Minnesota. So it's the week before. We still have another slate of awesome games this weekend.
No doubt. Of course, that game's going to be on our air, Ohio State, Minnesota. Fascinated to see how Michigan responds against Maryland as well. So we'll get to both those teams, which have been making headlines in the Big Ten throughout the season. But our headline today is our big story, which comes out of Evanston. Actually, technically broke yesterday. Northwestern removed the interim tag from David Braun's title, naming him as the permanent successor to Pat Fitzgerald. The 38-year-old came to Evanston as the DC in January. He had never coached at the FBS level, got thrust into the interim spot, and flourished, leading the Cats to 5 wins thus far, one more than they had in the past 2 seasons combined. He'll be formally introduced at a 1 Eastern news conference here on the Big Ten Network. Jake, I know you have spent some time around David Braun this year calling games. I've gotten to know him a little bit as well. What has stood out with you in the time that you've spent with him?
Simply, I don't think there's a coach in college football, maybe in the NFL, maybe a coach across all sports that has exceeded expectations the way David Braun has this year. I mean, who thought they'd be here 1 win away from a bowl game? I go back to the Big Ten media days when we heard him talk, and just an impossible situation. He sounded like a head coach. He was in a real tough situation, and he sounded like a leader. And he said, listen, I talked to the players, and we collectively decided we're going to compete. We're going to try to win games. I don't think anyone believed that this is where they would be. Every coach says that, and yet he's the one that's put it on the field. When we've had our conversations, we called Northwestern Penn State, we called Northwestern Nebraska. When we talk to David Braun, a majority of our conversation has nothing to do with the X's and O's and the on-field. And here's why I think that's important. Because of all of the off-season situation and the questions and the narratives, we spent a lot of time asking him about how do you build a culture? How do you keep these guys together? The thing I came away was the first question he asked himself when he was named the interim head coach was not, how do I win games? It was, how do I make sure these players know that I love them and I care for them? He did that in action by having an individual meeting with every player on multiple occasions, having unit meetings, having team meetings, making sure that they were heard. He also said the importance of creating a family culture. Every coach says that. But what he told us is all the coaches, they are welcome for their kids to be in the building, for their wives to be in the building. So he's not just saying it, he's emphasizing it. I think those are important principles for a team that was in turmoil this offseason back in July to just say, principally, this is the culture that I want to set for the Northwestern Wildcats, and I'm going to do it through action and lead by example. I think that's a big reason they've been able to come together, which has helped them answer that second question, which is how I win games.
He's done a remarkable job. I don't think there's any question about it. I think the challenge does increase here significantly, right? There's a difference now between temporarily being the steward of a program and permanently being the steward of a program. He's 38 years old, as I said. Now, that's far older than Pat Fitzgerald was when he took over. He has coordinated a defense. Pat Fitzgerald had never coordinated on either side of the ball. But I do think one of the areas where it's really interesting, first of all, you got to figure out what to do with the offense. They've been subpar there, frankly, for years. And then not having a network, not being a guy who's recruited at this level before. I think there's going to be a lot of onus on who does he choose for his staff? How does he make those decisions that we don't really think about outside of the world of college football? But as you and I know, those are the things that determine where a program goes, all the stuff that happens behind the scenes that we don't necessarily see.
How often do you see it when in the NFL is a good example where there's an interim head coach, they make a firing in the middle of the season, it's going on with the Raiders right now, and all of a sudden they pop off and they start winning games and it's great. Usually players are vouching for their coach, like we want this, but then the year 2 comes, and as you mentioned, Dave, it's a completely different challenge than to continue momentum or to start to actually establish your team. And for Coach Braun, those are the questions that he needs to answer, is how do we take this from where we're at to the next level? Matt Rule had a great quote as he took over Nebraska this year. He's been at Baylor, Temple, now Nebraska. He said, I had to learn how to win at each place. It looked different at Baylor, at Temple, than Nebraska. That's for Coach Braun as well. Winning for Northwestern looks a lot different than winning for Penn State or Michigan or Maryland.
Although it looks fairly similar to North Dakota State. Now, I do think that is a place where he has an advantage because those are developmental programs,
Yes.
right? Those are, hey, who fell through the cracks in recruiting that we think we can turn into a really good championship player. And I'd say they have a nice track record in North Dakota State of doing that. Clearly, Northwestern's a developmental program. So, hey, how do you take players, retain them, make them better? Those are things that David Braun has done in his career. All right, let's move on to I want to start there, and I kind of just want to get a sense from you, first with the Buckeyes, and then we'll do the same exercise with Michigan. We're a week out from the biggest game. Mm-hmm. Give us a sense of where you feel like this program is right now. Like, where is Ohio State on the field, off the field, in terms of being at their peak?
What I'm about to say is why I was shocked Ohio State dropped to number 2 in the college football playoff rankings this past week. I thought last week when they played Michigan State, that might have been their best game all season. And I'll explain to you why. Look, the defense is the defense. There was questions in the offseason about how Jim Knowles would limit the explosives and do some things to improve the unit. They've been improved. No worry about that defense whatsoever. But for me, McCord played his best game. And these things translate regardless of the opponent. It was his fundamentals, his feet, his eyes, his anticipation, his ability to throw receivers open, his accuracy. All that looked great. And Ryan Day even echoed that in his press conference where he said the exact same thing, that McCord played his best game. I don't need to go down the list of the weapons. You don't need me to say why Marvin Harrison Jr. is so great, right?
Ibuka, you think he's good?
I don't even know. I don't think he's good. I think he's beyond that. We may need to invent a new word for him. Cade Stover's come on. I'm on the Mackey Award voters list now. I think he's got a great shot as anyone to actually win that thing this year. He's taken huge strides. The key to this formula is the health of TreVeyon Henderson. What has gotten lost is there's a difference between being cleared to play, meaning you're good enough, you're healthy enough to play, and being 100% healthy. He looks 100% healthy right now. He's got that extra pop and that extra juice. He reminded us that he's one of the best running backs in the country when he is 100% healthy. That, to me, is what's allowed this offense to elevate to the next level.
It's interesting. They had so little explosion in the run game in the earlier weeks of the year when TreVeyon Henderson wasn't at 100%. They have 15 carries of 10 yards or longer over the last 3 weeks since he's come back. If you extrapolate that over the whole season, they'd be third in the Big Ten. Yeah. And they're second in the Big Ten in passing plays of 10 yards or longer. So this is now the fully formed offense. This is what you expect Ohio State to look like. What about their opponents next week? There's been some craziness, as has been well documented, surrounding Michigan, and yet they continue to seem to be impervious to it. From where I sit anyway. How would you evaluate the state of the Wolverines a week out from the biggest game?
To me, as I was thinking about this, what we saw versus Penn State last weekend, and I'm going to use your analogy. Remember the Billboard Top 100 we said last week?
Yeah, look at you.
I knew,
You've embraced it. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Well, do you ever play video games or anything like that?
Oh, of course, yeah.
You know the final boss that you have to get? Each level, the boss gets a little bit harder and harder that you have to beat.
Okay.
This is Michigan in their final form. It's been a few years in the making, and what we saw last week was Michigan at their best. You know, at this time last year, the question was, can Michigan throw themselves into victory? Can JJ step up? Well, that's been addressed all year long. They've been a passing offense before the Penn State game. Why I say they're the final form is because Michigan showed that what they're capable of when they need it most. They're going to get in goal line formation in the middle of the field, and they're going to get back to big boy physical football. So we already know they can pass their way to victory. That's been addressed. But now they checked off the box to say, don't forget about who we really are at our core. We can still run the ball. Those are complementary. The defense is playing. This could be the best defense they've had in the past 3 years. You know, the first year heavily leaned on Hutch and Ojabo off the edge. Last year, a little bit more pressure. This year, they do a little bit of everything. So it's been 3 years of on-field production and growth to get them to their final form right now.
I think this is where it's most exciting, and we don't know what's going to happen this weekend, obviously, but assuming they play at the level that they each have here over these past few weeks, we're going to get peak Ohio State and peak Michigan.
Yes.
And man, I mean,
hopefully both teams are healthy.
Yeah.
There's been some little nicks and bruises. Would love to see both teams healthy at full strength. The toughest thing about everything going on is it's taken away from the players on the field. You get so few opportunities to play, and fewer still to play in big-time matchups. I know both those guys from talking to Buckeye media and Michigan media. They can't wait to see the players compete on the field.
They've been competing quite well. It's amazing. We talk a lot about the offense and what they look like. You've got one team in Michigan that's first in the nation in scoring defense. Ohio State is second. I mean, everything is strength on strength, both sides. These are just really complete, well-rounded football teams. That is going to be an incredible scene.
Fun to watch.
In Ann Arbor next weekend. So much more to come. Game analyst Joel Klatt puts out his top 10 every week. Continues to have Michigan on top. He's got Ohio State at number 3 and has future Big Ten member Washington in his top 4 right now, with Florida State all the way down at 8. Remember, the CFP committee has the Seminoles 4th and the Huskies 5th. And Joel Klatt of Fox Sports joining us now. Just came off of calling Michigan against Penn State last week. And so let's start there, Joel. Michigan just ran the ball down Penn State's throat, as we know. You still have the Wolverines number 1 in your rankings this week. Tell me what has stood out to you as you've watched them and weighed them against the other teams that might be in that number 1 spot.
Yeah, they have played more consistently and more dominant than anybody else in the country. Even with how great Georgia has played recently, they didn't do that for the entirety of the year. And now when you look at their strength of schedule between Georgia and Michigan, Michigan's actually a higher strength of schedule, a better, if you want, a tougher strength of schedule. So I thought that honoring the way that they've played so consistently and so dominantly during the course of the year. And I thought what was interesting on Saturday, Dave, is that you look at, the 32 straight runs and how impressive that was, but that wasn't a team that was running the football that great coming into that game. In the last 3 games, if you look at Michigan, they were averaging about 3.5 yards per carry. And yet they went back to their roots. They got big. They had the depth and the continuity with their offensive line to get physical and to beat up on what was a very good rush defense. That rush defense, by the way, if you strip out sacks, that was the number 1 rush defense in the country against Penn State. And so I thought that win, there's no way I'm going to move them down after that win, knowing how tough it is to beat the Nittany Lions. And so they remained my number 1.
How do you think the distractions impacted them this past weekend, if at all? I mean, you've spent a lot of time around this team this year. You guys have had them a number of times on Big Noon. What's your sense of the impact here?
I thought it focused them more. I thought that they were an angrier team and a heavily motivated team. It's one thing because coaches will tell you, and I'm sure you've heard this from guys you've worked with, is that the quickest way to be defeated is to be distracted. Right? You've heard that old adage. And yet, this distraction is actually working in an opposite vein. And the reason is because this is working as a common goal and purpose. And every coach dreams of having a team that is willing to lay down individuality, individual accomplishments, and really hone in on a common goal or purpose. That's when you get something that is incredibly powerful with a group of guys in a locker room. And I think the embodiment of that is actually J.J. McCarthy. That guy was as happy for his team as anybody, and he was a quarterback who's in the Heisman Trophy race, and they ran the ball 32 straight times. It didn't matter to him. And that's really the sentiment that I get around that program all the time.
How about the flip side of that game with Penn State? We talked about the build-up and that this was their second opportunity of the year to have a breakthrough win. Not only did they not get it, but they didn't look very good. It was a reasonably non-competitive game, certainly by the end. And then they made the decision to fire Mike Yurcich, James Franklin did on Sunday. What do you make of that and where Penn State is right now?
Okay, so first the move on the offensive coordinator, Mike Yurcich, and that's within James's purview, and in particular with the way that they played and the game plans that they had against Ohio State and against Michigan this year, they were not close to being. It's almost like the game plans were there to make it a close game, but certainly weren't there to actually win the game. Okay, I personally believe if you're going to ask me about Penn State's offense, I believe that their running backs need to get into home position more, or the dot, kind of that behind the quarterback, and what would be the pistol or a deep eye, and get downhill. If they did that, they would put the linebackers in more conflict. You would open up the tight ends a lot more, and you would get Drew Aller in a position where he can throw heavy play action versus just the RPO play action, which is all side to side. That's something that I think that they could fix remarkably easy. And the fact that they didn't go into that is troublesome. They also, in both of those games, failed to really locate what their strength was and lean into it. You know, I don't believe that every team is going to go out there and wipe away their weaknesses. In fact, you know, I think great teams, they know their weaknesses uniquely. And then what they do is they also know their strengths, then they lean into their strengths. Here's the evidence of that. Ohio State against Penn State, Abuka wasn't on the field. Henderson wasn't on the field. What do? They throw it to Marvin Harrison Jr., you know, a billion times. And what did Michigan do? Well, they know, okay, well, we've got an advantage in the offensive line. They leaned into that. Whereas Penn State in those situations, they don't have a place where they can lean into and say, this is our strength, this is our identity, and that's why they made the move. Last point on Penn State that I would make, Dave, is that I think that James Franklin needs to look internally. And because the game management that he used in both the Ohio State game and the Michigan game suggested that he thought his offense was going to be in a shootout. So the aggressiveness on fourth down in certain points, chasing two-point conversions, that's what you do if you've got a great offense and it's going to be 45-42. But when you're playing a defensive-oriented game, if Iowa has taught us anything over the last few years, it is that you can play field position football and win.
Yeah.
And I thought he went for it on fourth down way too soon against Ohio State. He did the same against Michigan, and then chasing the points in particular at the end, down 9 with the two-point conversion. I think James needs to manage this team for what they are, which is a great defense and an offense that you've got to nurse along.
Definitely some questionable coaching decisions, no doubt, that we were talking about as the game was going on and that you were talking about as well on the broadcast with Gus. I do want to ask you about Ohio State. You've already established you think Michigan is the best team in the country. College football playoff rankings, obviously we look at resume, and Ohio State had been number 1 here for the past couple of weeks. Now Georgia has jumped them. Are you comfortable with that decision based on kind of the way the committee evaluates it?
Yeah, I mean, and they're the 2-time defending national champion, and I know that they might not be evaluating those years, but it's hard not to at least, you know, acknowledge what they're doing and the streak that they're on, both from a win streak perspective and how many weeks they've been at number 1 in the AP poll. It's the second longest streak in the history of our sport, only to USC early 2000s in terms of being number 1 in the AP poll. So it's hard to argue with that. Now, what I would take exception with is, you know, Missouri being 3 spots higher than Penn State, or Tennessee being where they are. It's almost like, and I've told this to you before, they cook the books in the back end in order to make something happen up top. And that's what's happened there. Like, there's no I just don't believe that there is a reality where Missouri is a better football team than Penn State. Penn State struggled against 2 of the best teams in America, one-possession games in each of those. And yes, their offense didn't look good, but it's still the 15th ranked scoring offense in the country. They're still the 4th ranked scoring defense in the country. Mizzou, respectively, is 31st and 44th in those 2 categories. So how are they 3 spots higher? I'm not sure. With a 4-point win over Middle Tennessee State, a 7-point win against Memphis, having to survive with a 61-yard field goal against Kansas State. So you see my point. The questions come more in the back end of the poll than they do for me at the top.
I do want to ask you about the biggest riser in the poll this week, and that, as everyone knows, was the Iowa Hawkeyes.
Yes, right.
Up 6 spots. So with everything that's gone on this year, right, starting with the suspension of Noah Shannon for the season for gambling, which Kirk Ferentz has taken major umbrage with the injuries. I mean, they brought in a high-level transfer, a guy who led his team to the college football playoff, a quarterback in Cade McNamara. They had 2 All-American caliber tight ends go out for the year in Eric All and Luke Lachey. I mean, you could just go down the list. Everything that went on with Brian Ferentz that Kirk had to deal with in terms of being forced to have his son, an offensive coordinator, gone at the end of the year. What do you make of where Iowa is, and kind of put in perspective how they've gotten to this point?
Well, would it be? I'm going to ask you a question if you don't
Okay.
mind.
Yeah, that's fine. Turn the tables.
Is it too much knowing what Kirk has achieved at Iowa? And there's an immense amount.
Yep.
Could you make an argument this is his best job?
Yeah, I mean, we were talking about Big Ten Coach of the Year on the show yesterday,
Yes.
and I think Kirk
I don't disagree.
absolutely has to be in that discussion. Yes, I mean, I guess it's like I think the challenge for me, and I'm really interested in your take on this, and I've already made some explanation as to why the offense is where the offense is, but you still have the worst offense in the country by one measure, total yards, which is an imprecise measure, but it is one measure that we go with. And so are you responsible for that as the head coach in part? Like, do you get credit for overcoming a problem that you helped create? I mean, that's the question for me. But 100%. Man, they have had a ton of stuff thrown at them. And to be where they are, where they only need one win to be in Indy, I think it's pretty remarkable.
I agree. I agree with everything that you just said. Does he have to be held, quote unquote, accountable for the offense being what it is? Yes, absolutely. And yet, in the same breath, you can say that the offense, in some ways, has overcome an extreme amount of adversity with all the injuries that they've had, because this was supposed to look different. They are a tight end oriented team. When you lose your two tight ends, where do you go? They don't have many guys to throw to on the outside, so what the offense is trying to do is severely hindered, and not just by their offensive coordinator, but just because of the realities of the personnel that they have versus the personnel that they thought that they were going to have. But you also have to give them credit for knowing the style of game that you got to go win and play in order to be successful. It's part and parcel to the last answer I gave just about Penn State. I would suggest that Coach Franklin at Penn State didn't manage the game for the team he had on the field, whereas Kirk Ferentz always manages the game for the team that he has on the field, and that should be applauded. And this is one of the reasons why they are so consistent and why they are one win away from being the West champions and going to the Big Ten championship game. So all of those things can be true. And what happens moving forward, I'm not totally sure. But Kirk Ferentz, I think, in a lot of respects, and in particular with what has gone on at Michigan, is going to get a lot of backing for the Big Ten Coach of the Year.
Yeah, it is a fascinating team this year, and as you say, you will almost for sure see them in Indy. Need just one more win here down the stretch. Joel, great stuff. I know you guys have Michigan and Maryland this week, the prelude to the huge showdown next week in Ann Arbor. Have a great call, and we'll talk to you next week.
Appreciate it. Good to see you, bud.
From practice, Johnny, really appreciate you taking the time. You're the fourth Illinois player ever to be a finalist for that award. No one has ever won it. What would it mean to win that award and become the first Illini to do it?
That would be great, just to represent my school, the culture we got going on at this program, just to represent my family. I've been working hard these past 4 years just to be the best me possible. So to win an award, any award, would be a great honor for me.
It's interesting to think back a year, and I'm guessing that this is kind of the ideal scenario in terms of personally, where you say to yourself, I want to come back and I want to have a really good year. You were a second-team All-American last year. You were certainly on plenty of draft boards, but now you're being mentioned as an almost surefire first-round pick. So take me through kind of that thought process of where you were a year ago, the decision to come back, and kind of how you feel like it's played out from an individual point of view.
Yeah, had a dominant year last year. There was a lot of thought throughout the process of coming back or going to the draft. I knew I wasn't going to be where I wanted to be drafted. So I talked with Coach B. He was like, man, you come back, you have the year that you had last year. I promise you'll be going first round. And it's every kid's dream that plays football to go first round. So came back, been doing my thing, and hopefully I could go high in this draft.
This defense, though, Johnny, has not really been at the level it was last year. And part of that is you guys were unbelievable last year, and you lost some really high-level players, particularly on the back end. But you were first in the nation in scoring defense last year. You're 12th in the Big Ten in scoring defense this year. So it is a significant drop-off. What do you think has been the challenge of getting it back to the point where you guys were a season ago?
Just bringing that swag back. Last year, everybody brought energy. like you said, we had a lot of great people transition to the NFL. Getting those guys, our DBs, in a sense, on the same level that those guys who got drafted were, just up front. I feel like up front we're the veterans on the defense. So just helping everybody out with play recognition and just being great leaders to the rest of the defense.
I do have to ask you about the quarterback situation. It is really interesting this week. Frankly, I think it's gotten a lot of discussion here on our network. So, yeah, John Paddock, who came in at the end of the Minnesota game for the injured Luke Altmaier, leads you guys down the field. You score a touchdown, win the game. He played last week. He threw for more than 500 yards. Now Luke is healthy this week. He's going back to be the starter. John Paddock, fresh off 500-plus yards, is going to be on the bench. What have the discussions been like internally with you guys about what's going on with the quarterback spot?
We just leave that to the coaches, honestly. We trust whoever our coaches put in. Our coaches know what they're doing, so we trust every decision they make. We never question it. I feel like both are great quarterbacks. You know, John stepped up big time when we needed him. Luke was injured. But whatever decision the coaches make, that's on them. We love whoever's at quarterback because I feel like they're similar in ways, but they both could lead us to victory.
Let me ask you a little bit about your game. I mean, I know you were a running back in high school. Have you thought at all about volunteering your services on the offense?
Man, I wish. Every day I try to get back there, even goal line. We could be on a half-yard line. I just need a touch to get back in the groove.
What did that look like? I mean, what were you playing running back at in terms of a weight?
I think sophomore year I was 225, then 245, then 250, but I was moving.
Yeah. All right. So were you a breakaway speed guy, or describe your run game?
Oh man, I was like the fridge, you know.
Good reference.
Breaking a lot of tackles, you know. Me with my size, I think a lot of people just scared to tackle me. So I feel like once I got in open space, they'll try to chase me down and tackle me from behind.
So you were the 1,024th ranked player in your recruiting class. You did have some really nice offers. I mean, it's not as if you were a complete unknown, but certainly people did not expect you to be a guy who 4 years down the line is a finalist for a trophy awarded to the best defensive player in college football. Why do you believe you were overlooked, Johnny?
I couldn't tell you why. Probably just I never went to camps coming out of high school. You know, as a high school player, that's where people get their recognition, their exposure. But I just knew my hard work on the field, on and off the field, would eventually play off in the back end. I brought that same work ethic and mentality when I came to college. You know, I felt like I was an underdog all the way up until now, and even now I still feel like that. So just trying to outwork everybody and be the best in whatever I do.
Got a lot of football players in your family, and that includes your brother Jer'Zhan. You guys played them earlier this year when you played against him when he went head-to-head against Toledo. There were all the great shots of your family in the stands and the divided loyalties in that game. It went right down to the wire, and you guys pulled out the win. What was the trash talking like afterward?
Oh, man, elite. I was an elite trash talker right after that game.
Give me an example. Give me an example of some elite trash talking.
He scored, and then he was like, y'all trash, we go whoop y'all. Then after the game, I couldn't say nothing because they was up at the time, so I was just quiet. Like, all right. After the game, we won. I was like, get off my field, go back to Toledo. Like, it could be a long bus ride back. Just brotherly love, you know, that competition.
Speaking of family, you've got a daughter, Jovi, who turns 1 tomorrow. What's the best part of being a dad?
Just seeing a little version of myself, you know. You can always see a kid grow up, but once the kid's your own, it's like it hits different in a sense. Watching the kids grow up, seeing them grow teeth, and just spending quality time, loving them. You know, I feel like everything I do now has a bigger purpose. I feel like everything I do is for her rather than just me balling out for me. I'm trying to like feed her and be the best father for her.
What's the most challenging part of being a dad, particularly being a dad and a college student and a football player and all of the different stuff you've got going on?
Honestly, I don't feel like no part is hard when you love it, other than changing diapers, that's got to be the worst.
Yeah, I can vouch for that. I think many people can relate to that. Hey, I wanted to ask you a little bit, but before we came on the air, we were talking down the line, and somebody jumped in talking about you as a finalist for the Nagurski Award. I want to give people a look at what that looked like and sounded like. So let's listen in. You doing the interview?
Johnny Newton right here.
What's up, Brett? Oh, how are you, man? So that was your coach, Brett Bielema, jumping in there, encouraging people to vote for you for the Nagurski Award. Just big picture, give us a sense of how things have changed. I mean, you were part of this transition. You were a player who was already at Illinois when Brett Bielema came in. What has it meant to have him come in, and how do you feel he's impacted this program?
I feel like he's changed it completely. My first year, we weren't even close to a bowl game. And now just last year making it to a bowl game, that not even being the main goal, we got greater goals. He say 1-0 every week, so we try to imply that into our play style every week. He's a great coach, knows football, has taught us more football in a week than I've probably ever learned in my life. And he's helped us out with the game, with the knowledge, and brought in great coaches and great strength staff to support us and make us be the best players. He's just a player's coach. We love him.
We were talking about a bowl game. You're one win away from that, so you could get there by going 1-0 this week against Iowa. Give us the quick scouting report on the Hawkeyes before we let you go.
Great football team, as everybody can see. Their defense is elite. I could say the least. Just remembering us playing them last year, it was a tough game, 9-6. Tough, hard-fought battle. But, we could be expecting the same this upcoming Saturday. Like I said, they're a great football team. Know how to control the ball, know how to control the game. They're ranked 16th in the nation for a reason. And, I feel like it'll be down to the wire this week.
Well, John, it should be a really good one. Enjoy the game this weekend. Best of luck. Enjoy the birthday celebration tomorrow as well. Thanks a lot for taking the time, and congratulations on what has been a great year.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Tune in this Saturday.
It's fair to say it's a bit of a logjam after that. 5-way tie for second. Illinois, Nebraska, Northwestern, Minnesota, Wisconsin. All at 3-4 in the conference, 5-5 overall. Hawks could clinch their spot with a win over Johnny Newton in Illinois. We just talked about, I mentioned leading into Johnny Cooper-DeJean out for the year. A significant blow, no doubt, for the Hawkeyes. How does it change the equation in this game and for Iowa going forward?
So just for Iowa, when we called the Rutgers game last weekend, we asked Kirk about it, and he said, well, this is one of the best players I've ever coached on any team at any position. We asked him why, and he was just going down the list, and he said, really, the overwhelming theme is there's no weaknesses in his game. But off of that and how it applies to this game and their game plan, he said because of how talented and how smart DeJean is, it allows them to do a bunch of things in terms of disguising coverages, leaving him on an island, and trying to play the mental game with opposing offenses. Next man up isn't Cooper DeJean, so you might have to get a little bit more vanilla. You can't get into some of those disguised coverages. And how that affects Illinois is, well, who's the quarterback going to be? Well, now they're at advantage. Now, Brett saying it's going to be Altmaier. They're at an advantage not having to identify where number 3 is at all times.
Illinois plays a ton of close games. So does Iowa. The Illini, 4 straight games decided by 4 points or fewer. There has not been a streak that long in the Big Ten in more than a decade. Nebraska and Wisconsin, the Huskers have lost 2 straight. The Badgers have dropped 3 in a row coming into this one. So the beauty of this game is, in all seriousness, someone wins. Someone becomes bowl eligible by winning. How do you parse this one out?
Well, how about the crash course this has been on? I mean, I think a lot of us had this circled in the offseason with the 2 big-name coaching hires, Fickell to Wisconsin, Rule to Nebraska. Both teams have had disappointing moments at this season, but I think Nebraska's probably exceeded expectations, whereas Wisconsin at times has, fell short of the standard. Of course, they've dealt with injuries. This game is so important to get to that 6th win. programs in transition. It's not about the bowl game at the end of the year. It's about the 15 practices you get. I mean, these are brand new systems for both teams. Those 15 practices are another spring ball. They're another spring period. Now, this isn't their last chance to do it, but to get to that 6th win now and know that that's in their future, massive.
By the way, last time Nebraska won at Wisconsin, Barry Alvarez intercepted a pass for the Cornhuskers.
It's a long time.
It has been a while since the Huskers were able to pull it off. Hey, we got hoops coming up tonight on the network. Doubleheader starting.